Hey everyone, James and Taylor here, and today we are actually going to be putting out a pre-recorded episode that we did with the Touring Families podcasts. Dave over there did a great job asking us a bunch of questions about our particular take, and while it's not the same kind of streamlined episode that you're used to from us, we hope you will enjoy it because it's a good back and forth with someone who isn't necessarily like a totally bought-in unschooler or self-directed learning aficionado or anything, but Touring Families also has a lot of really interesting stuff going on over there. They do permanent travel with their family and are interesting folks with a cool perspective on life. So without any further ado, I'll turn you over to Dave and our interview. And until next time, we love you and we'll see you soon.
Welcome to the Touring Families podcast. This is the podcast where we seek the meaning of family travel and adventure. We do that by discussing a variety of topics, especially parenting, education, finances and logistics, and of course the travel and adventure itself.
Welcome back to the Touring Families podcast. This episode we have James and Taylor Davis with One Free Family. James and Taylor have 3 boys, Oliver, Ezra, and August. They live in New Hampshire, and what I would consider them experts in the unschooling, peaceful parenting, autonomous learning space. So here we go with James and Taylor. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, we're doing really well. Experts is a high praise for us. We don't always feel like parenting experts, especially when we're in the throes of parenting on a day-to-day basis. But I think it's certainly accurate to say we are aspiring to parent as expertly as we can with the information we have right now. So.
Yeah, that's well said.
Yeah,
thanks for having us. We're happy to be here talking to you.
Best,
yeah, absolutely. And that's all anybody can ever do is their best. But it seems from listening to you guys on your podcast, One Free Family, and reading the different things that you have out there, you have spent a ton of time researching these different methods of parenting, and that's why I would say you've either moved or are moving into the expert status, but I'm sure it's a moving target. So I guess if we could just get started and explain to everybody kind of I guess we could start with where you started from, and then go into kind of what you do now. And I know I just threw out unschooling, peaceful parenting, and autonomous learning, 3 different things. But if you could kind of start with where you were and then move into that, would be maybe a cool way to take our listeners through.
Yeah, sure. I think that I don't think we even knew where we started. We started by having a kid and not really knowing what we were doing, I think, honestly. When our first child was born, I was actually a teacher in pretty traditional private school. And we were both education majors in college. So we both came out of college with our teaching degrees. James never went on to teach, and I did. So I think we actually started out pretty traditionally. We had some conversations before we had our first child about, what might we do for education, and let's stick with the public schools because that's what we knew and that's the way that we both grew up. So that's where we started. And I think the birth of our first kid just really threw us for a loop. We didn't expect it to feel as hard as it felt. We didn't expect him to need us as much as he needed us. We didn't really know anybody else in our circle who had kids yet. So all of a sudden we were kind of trying to parent him in the way that mainstream society was parenting babies. And we were getting all these messages about babies needing to learn to be independent, and he needed to sleep on his own, and he needed to sleep all night. And it was fine. He was going to be fine in childcare without me and all of these things. And it just wasn't working. He was strong-willed, and he made it really clear that he needed me and us, and especially me. He was a baby. He needed his mom. But so that's where we started. And then I think, there was, at least for me, I don't know about you, James, there's this little voice inside of me kept saying, like, there's a different way. There has to be a different way. And I kept ignoring it for a long time. Like, I was the person at the library taking out all the books on how to get your kid to sleep through the night. Did you have something you wanted to say?
No, well, I think that's right. I think basically for me, we had worked with kids both in the schooling capacity, and we had met at a residential or sleepaway summer camp
where we were counselors.
And when you're working with other people's kids, it's not that you care less about them, but the stakes don't seem quite as high. It's
sure.
Like you can kind of rationalize putting them through like these little ordeals, or putting them in situations where they kind of need to toughen themselves up, or not putting their needs first in some ways. Like you have a whole camp to run, there's 250 kids there. It's easy to not look at each kid on an individual basis, even if you care about them very much.
Sure.
But when it was our kid and he was struggling, the stakes went up a lot, and I think you'll find a lot of people in sort of that self-directed learning movement, they tend to come from, I think, two different backgrounds. One background is sort of like a philosophical background, kind of like, Jake from the Voluntary Life podcast, whom you interviewed recently, where he's thought about it a ton, ultimately makes this decision because he thinks it's best. And I don't know exactly where Jake will head with his parenting, but that's kind of one approach. And then the other approach is, well, my current thing is not working, so I better damn well figure out something else. And
kind of reactionary.
Yeah, and so we were kind of a mix, I think. Sure, our kid was really, really young, but it was still like a very early on feeling of like, hold on, this isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me also helped me reflect on what it was like to be a kid and what it was like to feel unconsidered from time to time, and to feel like my needs weren't placed first. And I don't know, I think that led us to wanting to explore and kind of turn over some rocks and figure out what other people might be doing.
Yeah, and so without getting into too many details, basically, I think the turning point for us was, and we talk about this in one of our early episodes on our show, was I was at an in-service training for my teaching job, and they showed us Ken Robinson's RSA animate video. Was it Schools Kill Creativity? Was that the one? Where he talks, all about how schools kill creativity. And it was ironic that I was seeing it as an in-service for my teaching job, because I couldn't really act on it in my classroom based on the parameters that were around me. But that was a huge turning point for me. And this was when our son was probably 8 months old or something. And I came home and I showed James the video right away. And I think that's where we started really digging into alternative education and different ways that we could raise our kid. And that was kind of like the springboard for changing everything about our life and discovering unschooling and self-directed education and all of that. And so that's where we are today.
Sure.
Do you want to know a little bit more about like what we're up to today? Is that?
Yeah, what I would like is, because I don't even know if a lot of the listeners are completely aware of what unschooling is. And like you guys, I am not a huge fan of that term, just because it's
me neither.
It's defined by what it isn't, as you've mentioned before. I like the autonomous learning a little better, but if you guys want, since you've done so much research and talk about this all the time, can you just explain a little bit as to what that is?
Yeah.
For someone who wouldn't even be aware of it.
We wind up using the term unschooling because that's like the most conventionally used term for it. And a lot of people in the self-directed learning movement have adopted that term. It was coined, I think, by John Holt ages ago in the book Instead of Education, I believe. And so generally the idea, and he was very, very anti-school. And at the time, school was basically the only thing anyone was doing, right? Like there was no real, there weren't like these world schoolers and self-directed autonomous learners, that just wasn't a thing. Everyone.
I think there was probably mostly, if it was outside of school, was at that time probably religious-based homeschooling.
Right, and school at home, for sure. And so what he was putting forth, and I think a lot of those early thought leaders were suggesting, was just forget about the top-down model. And so early on, I think it was somewhat useful to define it by what it wasn't, because even now, like when our people find out our kids don't go to school, they'll immediately start peppering them with questions. Oh, so you're homeschooled. So like, what do you do? Like,
what's your favorite subject?
What curriculum are you using? And so I think that's why that term was adopted more widely. I think the evolution of the movement as it is has pushed people more towards more positive statements about what we're doing. You'll hear people saying, hey, we're just all living life together, and like imagine what you do during summer vacation. Well, that's just how we live all the time. So sometimes people want to sign up for a class or a camp type thing. Our kids are involved right now in a basketball group and a choir, and they took a Spanish class.
Outdoor ed programs,
stuff like that. And by and large, their time is spent doing whatever they want. And
whatever they want.
Sometimes that looks like playing video games at home. Sometimes it looks like us all going out to the farmer's market with friends. Sometimes it means staying up pretty late. Sometimes it means going to bed early. It looks like, like especially if you were in college, what you would do on those winter vacations or, over the summer, some enrichment, mostly chilling, and all the learning and living that happens along the way.
And I think it's built on for us, the philosophical premise or the belief that learning happens most effectively and is most meaningful when people are intrinsically motivated and curious about something. So, our role as unschooling, or whatever word you want to use, parents, is to really tune into our kids and serve kind of as their partners on the journey. So to notice what lights them up, notice what they're asking questions about, find ways to feed that for them. Notice how they learn best, right? Do they learn best from us reading books to them? Do they learn best from experiencing things, from watching a video about something, or maybe a combination of those things? And so I always like to make it clear right away that our role isn't to kind of go in the other room and do our own thing all day, every day, but our role is to be pretty engaged with them and help them kind of meet their curiosity and feed their curiosity.
Yeah, right on. And to also just learn, do they like, additional input from outsiders, or do they like to make their own discoveries? It's this ongoing process, a very intentional process of getting to know your children as well as possible, and then being a presence in their life that you would appreciate having,
right.
Like a mentor with a little bit more life experience who is willing to come in and say, hey, you seem to be struggling, or you've hit this plateau in this thing you're working on right now. Do you want some help with that, or are you kind of working through it on your own? Very active process, but also one that really respects, as to the degree that it's possible. And I'm sure we'll get into some exceptions, because it can't all be all five of us individually deciding what we're going to do without considering the rest of the family. There's definitely some times where we have to come to some consensus as a family and go in different directions. But yeah, that's, I think, a decent way to sum up what our role is and what we're up to now.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And it's really cool. I mean, I like that you guys treat your kids as humans, as adults, I mean, they have their own personalities and their own decision making and everything. And I think that's cool how you guys do that. Do you, how do you introduce them to things? I've listened to some of your discussions on this in the past, as far as you don't want to push a subject or a activity because that could potentially kind of drive a wedge into their future interest in it. And I definitely wholeheartedly believe in that. And we've all seen that before with sports, the crazy parent on the sideline, grounding their kid because, he had a penalty or something like that.
Right.
And so, but then again, if you don't introduce them at least to some things, they may never discover it. Or how do you guys feel about that? Because that's kind of an interesting role.
Have you been in our kitchen when we've been having conversations together? Because I think I've said that exact sentence to James when we've been kind of working through our approach, is what's the balance between giving them space to make their own choices and making space for them to say no to an opportunity, and also, making sure that they are aware of all of the amazing things that the world has to offer. I don't think I have a perfect answer on that one yet, but I think we're kind of starting to figure it out. I think we're moving in the direction of feeling okay about it.
Yeah, so I think the key there is to present options without an emotional attachment that they'll be accepted. And this is really where the art form comes from, because it's really, really, really difficult to, especially if it's something you really care about, so something like skiing for us, we both really, really love to ski. And we live in a place where skiing is possible. We, lived in ski towns for multiple years before we elected to have kids. And I imagine it's similar for folks like you who really love to travel. It's man, I really hope our kid likes this, because if they don't, it's going to kind of suck. We're going to not be able to do this as often at the very least, or it'll be more difficult to do it together, or what have you. And so, when the stakes do feel high, presenting those things can be challenging. I would say that many things you can present many things and kind of just leave them out. It's a process called strewing that I don't know where that term even comes from, but the idea being that, so say we have musical instruments in our house. There's a viola in a case that's in the kitchen right now, and there's a guitar that leans up against the wall. We have a keyboard, and this stuff is there, and it's really ready to be used at any time of day. And the kids will pick it up, and they'll tinker with it. And sometimes, they'll want to learn, row your boat on the piano, which is what I was teaching our one son the other day. And sometimes they'll just hack on it, and sometimes it'll sit there for months doing nothing, right? And some of our kids are into music, some of them aren't. Like, it's just an ongoing process, right? But I think that process of introducing things into their environment and then seeing how they interact with it, that's the ideal. If we can aspire to that, then I think we're doing pretty well. Now, it doesn't always work out that way. Like, you can't really leave out a trip to Mexico on your kitchen floor and see if anyone picks it up, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes we do make the call that our family is just going to go do something too. We did go to, where did we go last year? Oh, we went to the UK.
To see Jake and Hannah.
That's right. We had a sleepover with Jake and Hannah for a week. We did that. We went to Mexico the prior year. Sometimes we do make calls and say, we just both really want to go here. It's not feasible to leave all three of you behind for like a week or two. And we understand that this might not be your first choice. Like, if they have any pushback, we understand that this might not be your first choice. And hopefully you can see that we try to respect your autonomy and your decision making throughout the rest of the year, right? So,
we do what we can, I think, to make it, and I'm sure that, this is where your area of expertise, we do what we can to make something like that super kid-friendly and exciting and fun for them. Yeah. So, there definitely are times when we're like, this is something that Dad and I really love to do, and we really want to do it together, and it's not something that we can, get somebody to watch you for, and we try not to do this too much, but this is something the family is going to do. And I'm pretty sure that, maybe radical unschooling purists might not be on board with that, but that's just kind of where we've landed for now. I also think when you were talking about the music thing, James, by building a rich environment at home, we also get to start to see what our kids are gravitating towards, and then we get to have conversations with them. Like, this is how one of our kids got into this little choir thing that he's doing. We get to start saying, like, oh, if you're really loving this this guitar and kind of writing your own songs and making up this music, you can do that together with a group of people, and here's this group I found that you could join. And then they get to, and if you're not sure, maybe we can see if we can go once and check it out. And so being able to kind of notice what they're loving at home and then bridge that gap that brings them out into the wider world is a way that I think it's been working for us too.
Sure. Yeah. Because so how old are your boys actually? I don't think
they're 8, 6, and 2.5.
8, 6, and 2.5. So they don't know necessarily yet. Oh, I go online and I Google, local choirs in this area. They don't know. That's where you guys
they need us for that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. Well, I've got several questions, but I think it would probably be helpful if I just asked a series of scenarios that would help the listeners and I understand kind of what you, how you treat these scenarios, and then that will, I think I understand from researching and listening to you guys a lot, but then that'll help frame the next questions I have. So,
perfect.
Like dinner time. So, how is that handled at your house?
So dinner time is pretty open-ended. We prepare meals. We tend to buy healthy food when we can, and we intermingle with stuff that may not be on the top of the healthiest list, but that our kids really appreciate, especially for snacking and whatnot. But we prepare a meal, and people are free to have that meal or not. We tend to not prepare additional meal type options while we're in the process of eating the meal that we've just prepared. So, like last night, Taylor made a delicious chili.
It was delicious.
It was really good chili. But only 3 of us were really interested in eating the chili, and so the 3 of us ate chili, and the other people did other things. And when they were ready and they wanted to eat foods, they either got food for themselves or we helped prepare something small. And that tends to be how it goes. Like many things, and this will be an overarching theme, I'm realizing as I'm about to say this, but we've also tried to pay pretty close attention to what foods they enjoy eating that we feel pleased about them eating, because food is one of those things, at least for me, that the stakes do feel a little bit more serious than some other aspects of their life. Like, I don't really care what length they keep their hair, obviously, but I would really rather they not eat Sour Patch Kids for 3 meals a day. You know, so
yeah, right.
We tend to decide to spend our money on mostly healthy foods. If they want other foods, they can spend their money on it.
Sure.
And then, we pay attention. So, like, we're, like, really heavy on carrots and cucumbers right now because our one son, who very rarely wants to sit and eat a family dinner, he really likes carrots and cucumbers. So we'll give him a little bowl or a platter of those with hummus or whatever, and that's what he'll chow on. So, yeah, it's pretty open-ended. I mean, we do wind up having family meals, and mostly it is when Taylor just makes something that everyone really likes, or if I happen to make something that everyone really likes, but that happens less often.
But yeah, I think maybe especially for your listeners, if they're not as familiar with this way of life, sometimes when I say it out loud, I realize how far to one end we are sometimes. But yeah, we don't have a requirement that everybody's like at the table for dinner and everybody's sitting there. I love it when it happens. And actually, it's super cool when it happens now because we know it's voluntary and that everybody really wants to be there, and it feels a little magical.
Right.
But it's like, here's dinner. Me and Dad are gonna sit down and eat, and typically the toddler ends up sitting with us. You know, come in or not, we'd love to have you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. How about bedtime for the 3 kids?
Yeah,
bedtime is an ongoing experiment, I suppose. The way it works at this very moment is our kids tend to ask when they want to go to bed, or not ask. They decide when they want to go to bed for the most part, understanding that if they don't decide to go to bed at a time that we're willing to kind of help them through that process, whether it's preparing a nighttime snack or, help around teeth brushing or snuggling in bed or whatever else they want from that given night, that then they'll be on their own to do that. So, like last night, we had our youngest son, he's 2.5. He typically just wants to go to bed around.
Yeah, he just knows when he's ready and he lays down with me.
7 or 8, and Taylor helps him fall asleep. Our middle son elected to want to go to bed around like 9, which is in the scope of time so that I'm willing to help him with that. Our older son was playing in a Fortnite tournament and wanted to stick that out until it was over, and that was going to end at 10. He ultimately decided to stop doing it early and came in with me and the other guy, and we just all went to bed together, and that was like around 9:30, I think. So yeah, it's very open-ended. The only real restriction we have on it is if you decide to stay up when other people are sleeping, you can't. Sorry, I'm walking in the back. If you decide to stay up later than other people, then you have to be respectful of other people's desires to want to get some sleep. So you can't just like stay up till midnight playing rock and roll music downstairs.
Right.
And if you decide to stay up later, that you'll just put yourself to bed. And we don't want our kids to stay up later than the latest adult stays up. That doesn't tend to be an issue because I stay up pretty late, to 12 or 12:30. But we at this point don't feel totally comfortable with them just kind of cruising when we're just dead to the world asleep. So
sure.
A very long answer to a short question. Most people would say, hey, we all go to bed at 8 o'clock. But yeah, that's
And I think it's been an evolution for us. We've gone through like ebbs and flows and different phases with it, because we went through a time when when our oldest, this was a few years ago, was wanting to try to stay up later. And so we were trying to help him with that. And then we were getting into a situation where he wasn't compensating by sleeping later the next morning. And that would have been okay with us if it was just affecting him, but he was having a really hard time coping, and he was, getting kind of short-tempered and hard to be around. And so we had to have some conversations together about, you're not just making a choice for yourself, you're just not getting enough sleep consistently, and it's really affecting the whole family. So what can we do to kind of work through this and fix or solve this problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, when it starts affecting other people, your free will, and this is true for adults and everybody their whole life, that's when your free will kind of ends. So it's good for them to learn that now, I guess. Okay, so how do you handle brushing teeth?
So can I talk about this? That's fun. That one comes up so much with parents. And that one, I mean, it's so interesting because I feel like we just because we've gotten lucky, have we had a really big struggle around teeth brushing?
Well, we've had conversations about it where people didn't want to in the past. One of the things that's true about brushing teeth is while the negative feedback you can get for not brushing your teeth isn't necessarily immediate, like those are bills that come calling eventually. And so, even though we actually our kids have brushed their teeth with, on a daily basis for their entire kid lives, both of our older kids have had cavities, and when they go to the dentist and have to get a cavity filled, that's a pretty unpleasant experience, and it lets you know, like, oh, yeah, I'm going to want to be brushing my teeth. So, like, they were back. They were like, the dentist told us we should be flossing. We got the little floss sticks. So now they're flossing and brushing multiple times per day because they don't want cavities. And I think...
Which kind of makes me sad, though, because I feel like there's also just a genetic component of that.
Well, that's what our dentist also told us, that, 60% of cavities are genetic. But the thing, I think, with toothbrushing, with staying up late, with eating, is most of these things, you can persuade someone to do most of these things in a healthier way just by logic and persuasion, because it's just the reason most adults have come to a general consensus about, like, getting more than 2 hours of sleep a night, or brushing your teeth, or not eating, only fast food and drinking soda, is because they're just good ideas. And since we try to talk to our kids and interact with them in a more respectful way, I believe they're more willing to listen when we take a firmer stance on something. And especially now that they get older and they're gaining perspective, reflecting sometimes, like the other day, saying, like, we're pretty lucky, like they were reflecting that one of their kids had really strict video game restrictions or something. Yeah, one of their kids, one of their friends, really loose household. One of their friends had really strict video game restrictions in their house, and they were saying, yeah, we're really lucky that you guys let us do that. And I said, yeah, we trust you to do that, and you've shown that you're willing to listen when there are more serious issues that you need to take more seriously, or they go against your initial instincts, And I think in that way, many of the things that people are most concerned about with a kid being self-directed, they're concerned because they're so obviously beneficial, but kids aren't, like, dumb necessarily. they'll notice, like, oh yeah, I don't want cavities or hurt stomachs.
Yeah, and I would say with teeth brushing too, I think a lot of people hit real challenges, like, during the toddler years before you can really reason with them about it. Yeah. But it's time, they need to be brushing their teeth. And we've definitely done all sorts of just, like, starting from a place of just trying to make it fun and silly. I think that's another, obviously that whatever you're doing that's working, that's fun and silly, maybe gets old eventually, and then you can find a new fun and silly thing. But, we've done everything from singing a song to talking about all the different foods that we're getting out of their teeth, or making jokes about whatever, just to kind of make it fun. And I've heard people who let their kids then brush their teeth after, and their kid thinks that's fun. That sounds a little scary to me, but just ways of just not making it such a heavy thing and keeping it lighthearted. Sometimes we brush teeth while we're in a bath. Like, that makes my toddler thinks that's funny, and he likes to do that. So also being creative. I will say, too, that I was just listening to a podcast with my kids. It's called Brains On by Gimlet Media. It's for kids. It's a cool podcast, but they were advertising an app that they have called... I forget the name, but it was like an app that I think has, like, little 2-minute segments to play while your kid brush their teeth. I mean, do what you will with that, but I thought that sounded kind of interesting, too.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to, you bring up toddlers, and I think that's a good time to highlight another, like, core component of our approach to parenting, which is that sometimes there just are unforeseen dangers in the world that your kid doesn't understand, right? Like, a toddler, you'll never be able to reason him into understanding the harmful effects of bacteria in their mouth, right? And if they're just unwilling to hear that truth, and, like, if you believe you have some truth in that area, or if your toddler just doesn't believe you that boiling water is going to be too hot to touch, you can stop them.
Sure.
I think you can view them as someone who's just slightly incapacitated in that way. They just do not understand, right? And just like if you, Dave, were going to go stick your hand in a pot of boiling water, I would stop you too. And I think that's a decent lens that we try to use sometimes, which is to say, if, my best friend had drank too many beers and wanted to pour a pot of boiling water on his head, I would stop him and understand that when he came to, and that when he was in a better position to understand why I did that he would be like, hey, thanks for doing that,
Right.
And I think that's kind of how I view toddlers in particular sometimes, which is to say, they're a version of themselves now that they won't always be. And I think when they, kind of mature and they grow into a more rational human being, that they'll say, something, I'm glad you didn't let all my teeth rot out of my head, and if they come back and say, you monster, you pinned me down and brushed my teeth when I was 1 year old, then we can have a conversation about it. But
for sure.
I'm not too worried about it.
I would employ every method possible before pinning the kid down. I would I would also say another, this is pretty specific, and I don't know if you're looking for this, but another idea that I've heard people use too is to think outside of the box of we have to brush our teeth right before you go to bed, because I think a lot of toddlers are just done by bedtime, and getting cooperation can be really hard when somebody is just struggling to even cope because they're so tired. So I would also say finding another time during the day that it might be easier to get them to cooperate, or that it might be fun, or if they're watching, their cartoon. I mean, our toddler won't watch anything. He doesn't really like watching shows, but if they're watching something that they like to watch, that might be a time you could brush their teeth or whatever. But just thinking creatively about ways to get it done. I think sometimes there's more ideas out there than we think.
Sure. Yeah. My son has brushed my teeth. I use that term lightly. It wasn't to the quality of brushing that I preferred, but the funny thing is he wants to do it with his toothbrush, and I'm like, no, we're going to use our own toothbrushes. I don't want your toothbrush in my mouth, and I don't think you want it in there either. So, but yeah, he's funny. So I have a couple quick questions. You had mentioned when you were talking about dinner time, that they can buy food if they prefer. If they want a certain type of food that you don't buy, then they can buy it themselves. Also, I imagine as they get older, with brushing their teeth, if they're 14 years old and they're refusing to brush their teeth, I imagine you would probably have a conversation with them to some degree, hey, I mean, you're old enough to know this, and if there are dental bills, these things don't come free. There's there's a painful price to pay for you, but it can be expensive. And so, and I don't know if you feel that way, but I guess what I'm trying to ask is, the money seems like kids having their own money in your style of parenting and household seems like it would be important. Because that gives them a level of decision making on what to do with it. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I think, money is just another version of having stakes, having some investment in the outcome of a given thing, right? So our kids, generally speaking, been understanding and respectful of, not just destroying stuff in our house because they feel like it, they don't sling an iPad across the room just to see what's going to happen. And so we haven't necessarily had to say hey, if you just smash that iPad, you're going to need to work and come up with a few $100 and pay us back. When it comes to something like a 14-year-old electing to get cavities and just choosing not to brush their teeth or something, I think ultimately I probably would still pay to help them to get their cavities filled, and that might influence whether I want to chip in and help upgrade their gaming computer the next time around. So I wouldn't say go get a job and in the meantime just have these cavities and toothaches. But it is a delicate balance, because I think on some level as parents it's my responsibility. I feel a responsibility to provide for my kids in all the essential things, and that means creating an enriching environment for them to pursue the things they're interested in. It means getting them food and a comfortable place to sleep and live and so forth, and some amount, I believe, of just doing things just for fun, just because it's leisurely and a good time. And I can also draw the line and say, something, I just don't want to buy you. I don't know, if he was 14 and wanted a bottle of vodka, I would say, I'm just not going to go buy you that. I think you're good,
Right.
If you want to employ some creative means to get one on your own, go for it. But I'm not going to be a party to that particular thing. So, it's a delicate balance. But, helping them have their own money, helping them make decisions that wind up mattering. The world introduces plenty of scarcity, which is another thing that money teaches them. But having them have scarce resources just by virtue of being alive in the world and figuring out how to put those scarce resources to work is a fundamental lesson, I think, of early childhood.
I think, and I think I hear you maybe saying too, with some money comes some freedom to make your own decisions. And because we so strongly believe in autonomy and freedom, it does become tricky sometimes, when our kids maybe really want something that maybe we're not willing to buy, or it doesn't fit into our budget, and they are it's going to be really hard for them to raise the money to get it. So we do try to find ways to support them to work towards something they want. And so, for example, our 6-year-old, he had an iPad that we bought used, and the screen kept breaking, and it just doesn't work anymore. And he would like to have another one. But because of, we're just not really willing to go buy a whole new had for him, because I think
it broken mostly because he wasn't very responsible.
Yeah, some of the reasons it broke is because he wasn't super responsible with it. So he's now saving his money, and he, saves money that people give him for gifts. He does jobs around the house to earn money. And he's actually really has not spent a cent in a really long time because he's working hard on saving it. So I think that's kind of, an important thing that they learn just by budgeting and having things that they want.
Yeah. And I was, both of those are answers. I appreciate both of your input on that because it's an interesting thing. It does give you a level of freedom for sure. Okay. So how do you handle, I know I just asked 3 different scenarios. So what about, I don't know what holidays you celebrate, but let's say, Thanksgiving. Let's say your family all gets together for Thanksgiving, and everybody's counting on you being there, and they're counting on the kids being there, and you want to go. I mean, how do you get your whole family there, or do you?
Yeah, we do.
Good question.
I think. Well, so part of it is in our situation because our kids like our families. They like their. My parents, they like Taylor's parents, they really like my brothers, and so when we go out places to see family, by and large, they're excited. Mm-hmm. There was a time, especially earlier on, where we could always get people to Thanksgiving, but in our family, it'd be now everyone wants to get together and take a picture, and this is for some reason, I think it's a classic point of
thing
attention,
that kids hate.
Right.
And I get it. I don't particularly love always going out on the porch and taking a picture either, but so you're in this awkward moment where everyone in the room sort of knows, especially usually there's a couple people that really, really, really want that picture to get taken, and then everyone else is sure, we'll take the picture. And then there's the one kid that doesn't have the perspective of if I just go with this for 5 minutes, it'll all be over,
Right.
And I think in that moment, it presents us an opportunity to try to help that kid to see how his actions will affect someone else and say, I know it might even seem silly to you, but this person really, really wants to get a picture taken of everybody so they can look back and remember what a great time we've all had on Thanksgiving, and sometimes that kid will opt out. And for me, that's okay. And if they elect not to and that person is disappointed, then I can help try to support that person. But I also want to make it clear to my kids that it's not really their responsibility to manage the emotions of, say, their uncle who really, really wanted that family picture, right? If he's going to be in a position, and it's not his uncles that would have an issue with that issues as a hypothetical, but if they're in that position where that picture just feels so important to them that it's going to ruin their whole day, it's not my 6-year-old's job to help them with that, right? That's something that they have to do to work on internally. But yeah, actually physically getting to the Thanksgiving, I think that is a time, again, when you build up so much goodwill and demonstrate to your kids and help them to see that you're working pretty hard to help them get the things they want from life. And if they have other experiences too, you probably don't want to make Thanksgiving the very first thing all year that you quote unquote force your kids to do that they don't want to do. You probably want to have a family dynamic that respects that there are 7 days in the week and some days of the week mommy and daddy get to decide. And if you have that dynamic, and you say, hey, we like staying home, and sometimes we go out. And today, mommy and daddy are going to decide we're all going to go next door for Thanksgiving or whatever. I don't know. I think we've gotten to a point where that's not too difficult. But it's like most things in parenting, where if you find yourself in the moment and it's the blow up and the craziness is all crashing down around you, you're probably not going to solve it in the moment. It was probably a preparation issue. And so if Thanksgiving is coming up in a month, there are things to do now. Steps you can take now that will prepare everyone for that moment. You can start talking about Thanksgiving now.
And you could talk about all the fun things that they're going to do with your grandparents if they're not so sure. You can talk about what really fun things from home do we want to bring to show our grandparents? What are some of our favorite board games that we can bring to play together? I think also as our kids have gotten older, and of course we're talking about the older too, I think they just have this general feeling of most of the time, mom and dad try to support us to do our thing. Mm-hmm. And because we do try really hard to do that. And so not like they owe us anything, but I think they just have this general sense of kind of cooperation and collaboration. They try to support us to do our thing, and this is really important to them. So let's do it. And I would say there are times when there's a little bit of resistance if it involves a ton of car travel, because like my family's in New Jersey, and so it's like a 5-hour car ride. Ultimately, they really like being with my family, but they're not super pumped about the car ride. So again, it's about like, how can we make this car ride fun? Right. We've settled on, we almost always drive at night, so that our kids can kind of hang out for the first couple hours and then they can sleep and the drive goes by faster for them. So again, it's about like, this is something that we're just going to do because it's really important for us to see family, and we know ultimately you all enjoy being together. So how can we make it, how can we make this drive as painless as possible?
Yeah. Okay. Now, so another scenario, this will be the last scenario, and then I'll have some more philosophical questions, I guess, for lack of a better word. Okay, so let's think here. Okay, Taylor, you are out doing some activity. You're a doula. Okay.
I am.
So Lauren, my wife, is also a doula.
I got to talk to her. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's super cool. So you are at a birth.
Yeah.
And James, let's say 2 of the boys are with friends or family or whatever. And you're with your oldest son, and you are leaving. I don't know if he plays baseball, but just bear with me and assume you're leaving baseball practice. And earlier that morning, he's like, this is going to be cool. It's just me and you today, Dad. And we're going to go to baseball. And, what would be really fun is afterwards we went and got a hamburger at my favorite place. And you said, you know what? That does sound fun. Let's do it. And you're leaving baseball. And Taylor calls and says, hey, I'm on my way home from a birth, and I have a flat tire. And I'm stuck. Yeah. And your son, who's been excited since he woke up this morning about going and getting a hamburger with Dad after baseball, says, I don't want to go pick up Mom or help Mom. I've been thinking about this hamburger all day. How do you negotiate that situation?
Yeah, I think you try to negotiate it with as much grace as possible, understanding that we're going to go pick up Mom and get the flat tire. Like, we're not going to go have the burger first, for sure.
I'm good, I'll wait.
We're going to get the burger. You can just hang out.
I've only been awake for 40 hours at a birth. I'm good.
You got off the highway? Yeah, so we're going to Mom. So that's for starters. I think, in the case of our son, I've seen him be very disappointed when he has an expectation and it doesn't wind up getting met. I think in our family, keeping our agreements is really, really, really important. And I also think that we're trying to help our kids understand a nuanced version of the world where, we're going to keep our agreements. It was actually funny. This is not exactly on topic, but last night I was talking to my oldest son about honesty. Honesty is super, super, super important to him. And we were talking about how one of his friends had been struggling to be honest about something and how that was hard for him. And I said, and it can be hard when you're spending time with people who aren't being honest. It can be like hard to maybe not fall into the habit of not being honest yourself. And he said, nothing could ever make me not want to be honest, except maybe if someone was like trying to rob me and they asked me if I had money in my pocket. And I was like, oh, okay. But so like that showed me that
like nuance,
there's
understanding.
Right, that there's possible, like you want to have principles and then you want to understand that, there's often going to be some nuance or some exceptions to things. And I think he would understand now, again, given that he's been had a very consistent message about keeping our agreements and also prioritizing in the case of emergency. I think he would understand. And again, if he didn't understand, if it was a really, really hard moment, I would want to be as compassionate as possible because I would need to understand that it was probably something that I omitted from my parenting approach that caused him to have that reaction in the first place, if that makes sense. So, like, if I had prepared him better for understanding that, yes, we always keep our agreements, and if there's an emergency, then we're going to take care of the emergency. If I had never, properly conveyed that, his getting really, really upset would just be, a piece of feedback that I hadn't conveyed that properly, probably. And it would probably, Taylor sounds like she's humming and disagreeing over there, but that's how I would personally take it. I would want to be as understanding and as kind as possible and reflecting to him that we're still going to do it. I certainly understand why you're disappointed. Let's try to get the burger after or later or at some other point. And in the meantime, I would want to brainstorm, I wonder why the supercharged reaction in this particular instance, why didn't he understand that Mom just needed help,
Yeah.
And try not to get frustrated with him, I guess would be my goal.
I'm totally with you on, I think some radical empathy there for the kid is really important. We're just going to go get Mom, and I hear that this is really, really hard for you, and I'm sorry it's feeling hard. I would also say I don't think it's 100% a reaction like that would mean you've messed up or done something wrong, like in your previous interactions with him. I think it's possible, it's important to reflect and think like, oh, where have I maybe missed something? I also think sometimes for kids especially, it's harder for them, and I mean grown-ups struggle with this too, to see outside of themselves and their own needs. And they tend to be sometimes a bit more self-centered. And so maybe also just some understanding of what's developmentally appropriate, I also think like our 8-year-old, and this is a personality thing and maybe an age thing. It's funny to imagine this scenario with our 8-year-old because I feel like he would be the one who would be like, Dad, go faster. We got to get Mom. Like, she's stuck. Come on, whereas like maybe our 6-year-old would be kind of a lot more disappointed and not quite grasping that empathy of like, whoa, Mom's stuck on the side of the road. We need to go get her. So I think it's also like a empathy for they just may not be developmentally ready to consider that other person, but also we just have to get Mom. Like imagine if you were stuck on the side of the road, you would want us to come get you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a notable omission from what I said. Basically the idea that sometimes you want to understand that you didn't have the power to save from that in the first place. That right, there are certain developmental milestones that they may or may not have reached, and that they wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
That's a good clarification.
And there's scenarios and different things that come up that you didn't prepare yourself or them for. We can't predict every single thing that happens. So the goal is for the kids to be as free and autonomous and get used to their own decision making. What do you think? And we've talked a lot about negotiation with these different strategies. So I've been in sales most of my life, and one thing is no one is more prepared when you're going into a certain negotiation or certain sale than the salesperson. A lot of time, you can be more prepared, especially like if you're cold calling or something like that. Like the person that answers the phone isn't prepared. You've prepared and practiced. So you're adults. You've read a ton. You are obviously going to be the stronger negotiator. How do you feel about outwitting your kids and continuing to prepare yourselves to out-negotiate, out-sell? You are in a lot of instances, you're like, okay, I've got to sell the kids on doing this. Like, how do you feel about that? Because you are well aware that you're much more prepared than them. And that in all likelihood, hey, I've got a few hours, maybe I'll even read more on negotiating or, different tactics. So how do you feel about that? Because you are outwitting the kids to get them to do something, in a way manipulating them to get to your outcome, but you're doing it in a strategic way to where they feel like they've come to that decision on their own. Have you thought about that? Or do you feel comfortable doing that?
Yeah, I can jump in or you can. Yeah, so I think that is in many ways, we are actively trying to avoid that amount of negotiation and persuasion more so than, I've often pointed out, like when I've gone and talked to summer camp directors, let's say, or other educators, that 99% of literature surrounding parenting is exactly what you describe. It's clever ways to get your kids to do what you want them to do. I would say we hope to be more in the camp of authentically helping our kids to understand what it is they want to do and then help supporting them in that. Now, there's still going to be some amount of time that we spend in that other less desirable area that you described, where, there's just something where we just really need our kids to brush their teeth. So yes, we're going to strategize on a way to help them to brush their teeth because that feels that important to us. But for us, the process is really about paring down our list of those things as small as possible. Yeah. So we spend as little time as possible engaging in that because I think I agree with the general sentiment of what you're saying, which is that I would rather not trick my kids into liking to play musical instruments, right? Like that's not the point of leaving musical instruments around the house. The point is that there are a certain percentage of people that take great joy in experiencing musical instruments, and they're around the house because if that is a medium that my kids choose to engage, we'll be there to support them. But I won't be sitting there being like, oh, Ollie's so talented at soccer. How can I convince him to sign up for soccer? Like, what tactics can I use? Like, I would never hope to employ techniques like that, except for the things that feel the very most urgent. And even then, I'm going to give as much space as possible. Because even something like reading, is another one that comes up all the time. My kids learning to read does actually feel pretty urgent to me. And I also have enough trust in the feedback that the world will provide that they will see for themselves in a reasonable time frame that reading is important and want to do it, right? So I will...
And we've seen that to be true.
Exactly. Now, if my kid is 17 and still hasn't learned to read, right, at that point, I might, dust off the old sales handbook and be like, how can I sell my kid on learning how to read? I feel
Sure.
And there might even be an earlier age, frankly.
Right,
but
right.
that hasn't been necessary. Our 8-year-old, he taught himself to read when he was about 6. Our 6-year-old's in the process of doing the same thing. So that feels really, really urgent, but taking a step back and being like, okay, this feels important to me. And since it feels important to me, I even more so want to give as much space as possible for them to do it. So yeah, like trying to avoid being in sales is how I spend a lot of my time.
Definitely. I think there's a big piece. It's been really, really a big part of my journey has been to take a really hard look at the things that I think are crucial for my kids to do or learn or engage in, and to really evaluate, is this really crucial for them, or do I think it would be nice? Do I think it would be beneficial for them, but not actually necessary? And it's been about being able to present options to them or present ideas to them without attachment to the outcome. And that's been, that is one sentence that sounds so simple, but it's been a lot of inner work, and I'm still not there, but I'm moving in that direction. So I agree with James, staying away from being salesy as much as possible, and really more thinking of myself as a partner who's trying to support my kids to live the life that they want to live. And that path is not going to be the exact path that I might imagine for them. But as long as they are safe and meeting their basic human needs, then I want to support that instead of trying to kind of send them on the path that I had envisioned.
Okay. Yeah. And so you mentioned reading right there. You guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but and I kind of agree with you where with the future, we don't know what kind of world it's going to be. And technology is moving everything so fast. So working their muscle of decision making and being autonomous, which they will be. We will all be that way when we get older. As adults we are, and then kids will feel that way as well. But creating that the soft skills and the kind of the self starting and their own decision making is important. And you're actively trying to focus on those things, whereas maybe other parents are actively focusing on reading or numeracy. Because you think they're more important, and you think the reading and the numeracy will be learned naturally. That they will. When I say learn naturally, that they'll want to learn them. I guess.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. That certainly the theory and the studies. Peter Ray has talked a lot about the studies that have come out of Sudbury schools and other freer schools that have long track records of keeping data on the outcomes of their kids because they've needed to. When you have these kooky models of schooling by conventional standards, people put some burden of proof, which is interesting because there's no real burden of proof on the conventional method. It's just what everyone does, so everyone assumes it works. But they've looked into, especially the reading and numeracy pieces that are extremely important to most people, and found that there's and of course it's very difficult to control for variables and control. We're not getting a swath of kids from all different backgrounds with different parenting approaches, and I suspect most people that send their kids to alternative free schools tend to be more intentional and so on and so forth, but they haven't found that there has been any issue at all in learning those things without any cohort whatsoever, and in fact that those kids generally have better outcomes when it comes to reading and numeracy. And again, these things are just so obviously in our current world beneficial that it's kind of hard not to come across them and to want to be able to interpret them. And of course, as your mentor or as a mentor to our kids, we might point out even more ways where they might be useful, numeracy in particular. Basically every game you're going to play, some amount of numbers, keeping score, or, controlling resources or whatever, but, pointing out to a kid, also, this particular numerical concept is useful in real life for, if someone wants to charge you more than something's worth or whatever, right? So, pointing out what are these skills, helping them to see it would be really useful to be able to do percentages right now. I'll do that really quick. Reflecting on when these things are useful creates a little additional nudges here and there, but I'm not even sure that's necessary.
Yeah, and I think we have our own unique perspective because we're approaching this with kids who have never been traditionally schooled, right? Our own kids have never been in traditional academic settings. They've never done formal schooling at home. So again, like our experience has been to see that by focusing on decision making and autonomy and self-ownership and kind of creating and providing a rich environment, that our kids are developing a really strong sense of numeracy and becoming literate just by living life, basically, and by having us support them. It might be different at the beginning. Like, let's say you're taking a 7-year-old out of school that has been in school for a couple of years and maybe has been like a struggling reader that whole time, because in reality they weren't really ready to learn to read. Yeah. You may have a kid on your hands who is a self-proclaimed like reading hater, right? Because it's been so challenging for them. So in those situations, I would probably, I would argue that it would be even more important to back off for a while and to kind of try to trust that once given time and space to feel like they've got their footing again, they'll see the importance. And so I think kids need to feel ready to learn something before they're going to learn it well. And so kind of being able to support that is, I think, going to be really valuable.
Yeah, for sure. And different kids learn things at different times. And I think like so many people are like focused on like, okay, now you do this, now you do this, now you do this. And it's like, okay, that's just seems kind of unreasonable. So you just had an episode recently where you guys had like a very tough day, and it kind of made me think like this type of parenting is very, obviously it's very difficult, or it's challenging. It seems more challenging than the norm. How do you guys kind of keep each other on point and maintain your energy and clear mind? Because it takes a high level of emotional intelligence and kind of seeing little small feedback that your kids are giving you that they might not even be aware they're giving you on things. How do you guys maintain your energy and keep each other focused and everything?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's not always easy. I mean, it's funny. I think the biggest difference in parenting the way we do from parenting conventionally is that you can't be under the illusion that someone is not taking care of your kid's problems or your kid's education or anything else. And that awareness is a great gift if you really care about it, because you're not worried, like, what's the true story between my kid and their teacher? Like, is he the problem or is she the problem, or, or whatever is going on? And so when you have to accept that it's your responsibility, that also creates a much greater burden on you. Of course it does, right? Mm-hmm. And that is emotionally exhausting in and of itself, because when there's a problem with the kid, like I've observed this, having worked with thousands of parents in my job doing summer camp work, parents are always asking questions. Like the ones whose kids are struggling, they ask questions. Well, I don't know if it's the school. I don't know if it's his friends. I don't know if whatever. But when you have young kids and they're mostly at home, it's like, well, if your kid is struggling, it's either because they were going to struggle, or it's because of something that had to do with you, or
the environment you've created.
Yeah, it has to do with you by proxy. And so, it's harder. And I think from that perspective, like, creating strategies. I think we did do a whole episode on this, but creating strategies around finding self-care for one another, around creating understanding for one another. I think, part of the reality of trying to move closer to being the parent you want to be is that you're very frequently going to be aware of a way you want to parent, but not be physically able to act on it yet. Because you decide that you don't want to get frustrated with your kid for yelling at you when you're about to go out for Thanksgiving dinner, doesn't mean you're not gonna. Mm-hmm. you may full well know that you don't want to do that, mm-hmm. but you just might do it anyway. And that's just being a human being 101. And so supporting one another, having grace for one another, and saying like, hey, we're each going to mess up sometimes. We're not going to always live up to the parenting ideals that we set forth on our very own podcast. And that's okay. We're not going to be perfect, but we both also need to be open to feedback from one another and say, hey, you can come up to me, and I am approachable in hearing that I wasn't living up to our ideals, or, hey, that did sound more manipulative than supportive, or you thought you sounded like you were listening, but I could tell you were restraining your frustration or whatever. And
yeah, I think that's been a big one for us that we've been working on lately, is being able to kind of point out to each other when we notice the other person kind of going in a direction that we know we don't want to go, and being able to point it out to them and then hopefully give them the space they need to regroup. I would say that James is way better at taking that feedback from me than I am at taking it from him, especially in like a heated moment when we're kind of trying to figure something out with our kids. So that's definitely an area that I need to grow. But that's big, being able to take that kind of feedback from each other and being able to give it in like a loving and gentle way and not in a punitive, shaming way. So that's a big thing that I think we do for each other. I also think you kind of alluded to this, James, but I think we also try to give each other space to do our own thing so that we can fill our cups in other ways. I mean, you know, I can only speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure this is true for James. Parenting in the way that we parent actually does fill my cup. I love spending time with my kids, and I can see, even like you said, the little feedback that we get from them. Like when our kid says something like, we're so lucky to live this way, like that feels really awesome. And just being around them so much feels great. And I also really, really, really appreciate time to do the other work that I'm passionate about, you know, the birth-related work and things like that. Or to get together with other unschooling mom friends in my community and have coffee on a Saturday morning and talk about our families and how it's going. So I think being able to create a life where we can give each other that sort of space to do the other things that fill us up helps us to stay more balanced and just be able to kind of approach our kids with fresh energy. And then just like you said, self-care. When I actually sleep better, you know, when I actually go to bed when the toddler goes to bed consistently, I'm so much better off. And it's hard to make that decision all the time because I also want to like stay up and hang out with James. Right. But figuring out what each person is different, really what you need in terms of taking care of yourself health-wise is really helpful.
Right. Okay. Well, cool. Well, I have a few other questions, but I've taken up a lot of you guys' time. Like, what is your schedule? Do you want to, where are you at as far as time goes? Because I'm happy to.
I think we could do like 10 more minutes probably.
Okay.
If that works for you.
Well, I have a question that's going to take like 90 minutes. So,
yeah, let's do it.
No, but I'll give you
Maybe we'll just need to get together again.
Yeah,
right on.
I definitely think so because, okay, so maybe if you could just answer this as quick, you know, briefly as possible, because I definitely wanted to at least touch on it, and I did not. Technology. So our son is 3, and he's getting close to 3.5. So just to give a perspective, so I see a lot of the benefits of technology. Lauren and I do, but he's young. We see some of the drawbacks as well of technology, especially at that age. So we don't really have boundaries for technology because we just don't have any. So I have a computer here and we have phones that we use, you know, for work, and we obviously will look at the news and things like that or whatever. But he has a tablet that did not come with us to Mexico. And the place we're staying in Mexico has a TV. It's in an armoire with a closed door, and the door was opened one time since we've been here for 2 weeks, and that was just Lauren and I, after he went to bed, turning it on for like 2 minutes just to see what the channels were, and then we turned it back off. So we haven't even watched TV. So it's cool because he has a different level of focus than a lot of other kids his age, and I think, and we like it. But I know that your kids, you allowed them to use technology, and obviously we can't get away from technology because it's everywhere and it's going to be beneficial for their life. You just want to touch on technology? I mean, that was a kind of a roundabout way to ask your views on technology. Yeah. And you can also shed a little light. I mean, be my guest to correct or shed light on the way that we're handling technology with our kids, and how you would handle that, because I'm open to changing our philosophy. I'm open to always changing my philosophies on things.
Yeah. Well, so I think for starters, you know, understanding that not all technology or supposed screen time is created equal is just a first premise of this discussion that I think a lot of people ignore. You know, they'll lump in playing a really thoughtful puzzle-based video game to watching reruns of 90210 to, you know, to being the same thing, right? Or just having YouTube play music in the background, or you know,
talking to your family on Skype,
exactly, playing a video game with a friend where you guys are both doing the same thing on the iPad versus just going down a YouTube rabbit hole of creepy videos of adults dressed as superheroes. You know, like there's 17,000 ways you can interact with technology, and not all of those, I think, bring the same value to the world. So that's where I would like to begin. I think the next piece is that technology falls into the realm, and you know, this is just a term we use in our household, of a realm where intelligent people disagree. And I think when you're in that position where there is a subject where intelligent people, research people, people who really care, disagree, you have to try to figure out what experts you trust and try to proceed with whatever information is available to you at the time. And from there, you need to observe how these things are affecting your own kids, So this is, like on the subject of violent-based video games, some parents have reflected, and I don't know if this is just them looking for this or if it's confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
But like when their kids play violent video games, they act more violently in their real life, right? If you're observing that in your own kids and you're afraid of that, it's perfectly reasonable to say, you're 5. We're going to cool it on the violent-based video games for right now because this is having a strange effect on you. And I think that just understanding that technology is so nuanced that your kid is probably going to be intrigued by it, that at some age you are not going to, whatever research you believe, you will not be able to prevent your kid from experiencing technology, and you probably shouldn't, but you're not going to be able to prevent them from engaging with it for all time. You should start preparing for that reality as soon as you're comfortable doing it. And so, and I think the last piece is be reflective of how you're modeling technology is for your own kid, right? So many people, like we don't have a TV in our house that's hooked into any sort of watching
we don't have
based
cable
thing.
or anything.
No, there's a TV, but there's an Xbox hooked up to it, but it's not even plugged into anything at all. And so our kids never see us watching TV. We sometimes watch a Netflix show at nighttime, maybe twice a week or something like that, but that's just not a thing we do. And so our kids don't see us doing that all the time. They don't think, well, why do mom and dad get to choose when we watch TV? The TV's not just sitting there as the altar in our living room, right? So they don't think about it. They don't.
Sure.
That doesn't come across their radar. Now, they have found things on YouTube that they really enjoy. They're on the internet and doing stuff like that all the time. And we've reflected with them on, the value that they're getting or the experiences they're having in watching these channels. And like in the interest of full disclosure, we in our family do have limitations around how much time people can just like sit in front of a computer watching YouTube. And I don't know, frankly, if it's the right thing to do or not, to be honest. It's just kind of what we landed on based on how we've seen that interact with our kids. Because I think there is, again, reasonable people that have suggested that you can be drawn into that if you're not totally aware of the potential dangers or, the kind of compulsive nature of watching, especially with the incentives that Facebook, YouTube, all these providers have of wanting to keep you watching, right? And so in that sort of unforeseen danger category, I think it becomes very tricky. I will say that in our house, for people that want to pursue something that they are actively engaged in, like a video game, let's say, that they are, or a Skype conversation, or, where they are an active participant in what's going on.
Yeah.
It's an arbitrary distinction that we have no limitations on that. And that's kind of just where we landed. But
it's totally evolved and changed over time for us. I mean, we went through a phase where we experimented with, 0 limitations around how much they could watch. And I think we ultimately found out, for better or worse, that it was actually too hard for me. I was really fretting like every single day. If there was a day when they watched a ton of, YouTube or something, it just was not feeling right for me. And I actually I tried for quite a long time to get okay with it because philosophically I like the idea of kind of supporting them, but letting them experience kind of the side effects of that and letting them ultimately come to a balance that feels good for them. It was just too hard for me. And maybe I'm sure at some point we're going to have to try again, because when they're 15, are we going to say you can only watch, 2 hours of this a day? So we're going to it's going to be constantly evolving. It's interesting, though, to see the differences, I think, between our kids and friends of theirs who have more limitations around, like, gaming and things like that. We see it all the time, is that our kids are typically now the ones who are quicker to suggest a different activity with their friends. Their friend shows up and they're like, hey, you want to go play outside? And the friend is like, in the place of like, oh, but I'm at your house where you guys can play as many video games as you want, and you have this sweet setup. Like, we're definitely going to be gaming now.
Right.
So I think part of the effect of giving them more space is that they do find kind of the balance that feels good for them.
Yeah, I ultimately think, if it were totally up to me and I was the only person existing in a parenting relationship, I would probably at least experiment with letting it breathe and seeing what it would be like for 6 months, let's say. Because I don't think you can break your kids with too much YouTube in 6 months. That's my personal belief in that. And I think, again, like the reading and math thing, like, why don't any of us in this room, in this conversation, watch 10 hours of YouTube a day?
Right.
Because it's boring. It just you get worn out on it after a while.
Right.
But I've sat and watched a show for 8 hours in a row that I was really into, like Lost or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I've been watched shows and I've been really, really into things, and I've learned to distinguish when it feels like I just have to watch the next episode because this is really fun versus I'm channel surfing, what's on right now, and that feeling is one of lethargy and boredom versus the one of like active, like I can't wait till the next Game of Thrones episode comes out, right?
Sure.
And I want my kids to experience like the joy of a show they really love. That's
Totally.
a great feeling. And I would be happy to have them learn quickly that channel surfing isn't a way to surf to happiness.
Sure. Yeah.
So perhaps we're prolonging that by the limits that we're setting right now. We're not sure.
But I also just don't worry about it very much. I think, again, the thing we're trying to model most is just living intentionally. And I think our kids are picking up on that. And I think most of the intentionally minded grown-ups I know don't sit around surfing YouTube all day. So I have no real reason to worry that my kids will, given that they see intentional living model for them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a super interesting topic, and I think we're comfortable with kind of where we've landed with just no like screens for him. And he's watched shows. He had a period of time over the winter where he was using his tablet. He was watching shows, and then we went out of town to California, and we were coming home like at the end of April, and Lauren basically was like, "Okay, well, it's going to be spring and summer, and we're going to go outside more." And the TV, she said, the TV just goes off, and it's just kind of stayed that way, and it's working now, but I mean, that's not going to be the case forever. So it's an interesting topic. I have taken up a lot of your time. I have one. Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Okay.
Totally.
This is one more because this is something that came up for us, and it's just I always like talking to different people that have different views on things to see what they would do, just because it's interesting. So here we are, we're in Mexico, we're on like a busy little street. It's a pedestrian only street. But our son was being silly, he was being a goofball, he was crawling around in the ground like he was a dog, and he was saying, woof, woof, and he's on all fours, and he's just being silly. But he was kind of in people's way to where he was like potentially maybe going to trip somebody. He was certainly going to, and likely had already aggravated some people potentially. And it was just kind of and we were getting a little bit annoyed too. So we sort of let him do it I guess we didn't really let him do it. We kind of initially started telling him like, hey, you can't do this. You might trip somebody. So my question is more to you. How do you feel about, because part of me was like, you know what, let him do it, and I'll tell him you might trip somebody, but I'm not going to pick him up and stop him and fight him on it. And if he trips somebody and they get mad, how do you feel about letting your kid get into a situation where they might, piss somebody off, and that person potentially could maybe yell at your kid because they did something? I mean, it's going to happen to them in their life, So where's the balance with that? I don't obviously want anyone else to parent my kid, but where's the balance of them getting kind of in a little bit of a hairy situation with maybe someone else, potentially another adult even,
Yeah, you want to start, actually?
That's a good one. I think you should start.
Okay, I've got some immediate
Seems
thoughts.
like you did.
Well, because this is where Taylor kind of changed my opinion on this. Early on, I was more in the thing of like, my kid's being a kid, and if like you can't deal with it, then like that's a you problem. But I actually have shifted over pretty dramatically, I think, to the other side, which is to say sometimes your kid is just not going to understand how their actions are affecting others. And again, if you cast it back through the lens of like, what if my best friend was engaging in some kind of behavior? And obviously it's a little hard to do with crawling around on the street, but like...
It'd be weird if your best friend was doing that.
Well, I think, again, back to the example of like my drunk best friend, I think this is like a decent proxy, and I don't want to say this to disparage kids, but like, if my drunk best friend was crawling around on the street and potentially going to aggravate someone, again, I would like stop them from doing it, even if they got pretty annoyed with me, even if they really, really, really wanted to do it. And I would say, I think when you're able to understand how this is affecting other people, that you'll understand why I can't let you do this. And I think there's I want to be pretty liberal in my application of that, because like you don't want to apply that too broadly. I don't think it can be a slippery slope at some point, but like things like kicking the seat of the person in front of you in the airplane is another example where it's like, we're just here on the airplane, like I don't want to force that old lady to scream at you to get her to stop. Like if I can tell by her body language and just by my empathy for her, of course she's going to be annoyed. Who isn't annoyed when someone's kicking their seat when they're trying to sleep? Right. And so I'm going to ask you first, and then I'm probably going to ask you again. And if you just really, really are going to be inconsiderate, at some point I will physically stop you. And I would do the same thing to my best friend who was drunk on the plane too, and to the degree that I was able. And if they were really upset, I would explain why I had to do it. And I really don't want to infringe on anybody's bodily autonomy, but I will do that if it means if they're just in a complete state of total disregard for the other human beings around them. And, and it feels bad. I'm not going to be excited about it. I'm not going to relish it. I'm not going to post videos of them throwing a temper tantrum to Facebook and, say like, he's mad because I wouldn't let him kick the seat on the airplane. Like, I'm not going to mock him for it, but I am going to stop.
And I think also, again, in thinking about alternatives and thinking outside the box, like the airplane example is a tough one because you're just stuck on the plane, right? But obviously I would probably be trying a lot of distraction techniques too, like trying to get my kid involved in something else that got him to stop kicking the seat, or offering that we go for a walk up and down the aisles or something to get the wiggles out. And maybe I don't know exactly what your situation, like where you were in Mexico when it happened, but like maybe some like, is there a spot we can go over here that you can crawl around that won't interfere with people quite as much, or like some creative problem solving around it before having to basically just kind of like bring down the hammer on it. But yeah, I think my instinct, especially if it was going to involve like somebody potentially falling over on him, would probably be to try to find a way to get him to stop. But I also hear you, and I hear that thought of like, I want to let my kid experience some natural consequences and like learn for themselves how to kind of be out in the world. And I think there are certain situations in which you can do that. Trying to think of an example.
But I also don't think, like, when it comes to grown-ups, most grown-ups are going to assume the parent is going to take care of it, right? So it's different if there's like other kids. Like if your kid is on the playground and like not being very fair in a game or something like that, I think then you just let the kids sort it out, right? Because you would like them to be fair and you'd like them to figure it out, but like the other kids just will get mad at him or not want him to play.
And he will experience those consequences.
And so I think there's plenty of opportunity, but I think like in most cultures, the understanding is that the parent will take care of it. And that actually if another adult gets very angry with a kid that's not their own, like that's just a sign that like it's all gone bad. Like that parent has sort of like failed to intervene in an appropriate way. And I don't personally want to put another adult or anyone in that situation. And so I don't know. I mean, it's like it's one of those ones that just feels like there's no perfect answer. But I think that lens of like when you reflect back later on when the person is able to really think about whether I was doing right or wrong, if I can have a very, very, very high degree of confidence that they'll agree. And so like a counterexample would be, I don't necessarily think that Mike would agree that I had to send them to school, let's say, in order for them to learn, right? Like when they're an adult, could come back like me and say, I could have learned without that. But I think any reasonable person in adulthood would say, I do understand why I couldn't crawl in the middle of this busy street and while people were tripping past me, like, thanks, I appreciate you doing that. And if they disagreed again, I would feel okay with the consequences. I think that lens winds up being a useful one.
Yeah, for sure. And we, we removed him and he was, everything was fine. He got over it, but it was just across my mind. I was like, maybe this would work a lot better if, somebody was just like, hey, get out of my way or something like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. But you know what? But then, like you said, that's not really fair to that person. They're not, that person's walking down the street having a nice, relaxing stroll. They didn't ask to be invited into this situation. So it's not really
fair.
Yeah.
I know that we just keep talking, but I know, well, we experienced, I just thought of it when we were in England. This happened. Remember Ezra, ran into a guy when he wouldn't stop running around on the street, and the guy was had something to say to him about it. Do you remember that?
No.
Okay. Well, anyway, it actually was very similar. We had like one day when we were right in last year where our kids were just like really squirrely and like really like, I mean, we were active and busy, but we were on the sidewalks and the streets were busy with cars, and they just had so much energy and they were running a lot and not really watching out for other people. And I was like 85 times more stressed about it than James, of course. But we kept trying to talk to them about it, and I don't think I was like really frustrated, so I wasn't doing a very effective job. But there was a point at which one of our kids kind of came out of the shop around the corner and like, I don't know if he stepped on a guy's foot or just ran right into a guy who was sitting at a table out on the sidewalk. And he did. I mean, the guy wasn't mean, but he did get feedback from the guy that was like, buddy, you really got to watch out where you're going. You just ran into me. So even when we do try to intervene, like sometimes our kids are going to keep pushing us and we can't get them out of there until something else happens. So I feel like it's likely that they are going to get that feedback from the world no matter how much we do, right? At some point they're going to get feedback from someone else. I don't know how meaningful that was to our son or not, but I imagine it probably wasn't awesome for him.
An impression.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure, yeah. Well, this is really cool, and I appreciate what you guys are doing. And, it says I have poor network connection. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. So I guess we better wrap it up. I've taken a ton of your time. Maybe we could do it again sometime because I enjoyed talking to you guys.
We'd love to, yeah. I mean, at some point I'd love
the reverse, yeah.
I was going to say, at some point we'd love to have, we're going to branch into having guests. We'd love to have you and hear more about what you and your family are doing because it sounds super cool.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I would have fun with that for sure. And I just also wanted to commend you because I know that you take an approach where, and James, you just said that your idea on, I don't remember all the things we talked about, but it had shifted radically and swung in a completely different direction. And I appreciate that. And I know I said that to Jake too. And just people opening their eyes to all these different scenarios and being willing to be flexible and change their mind and maybe change their mind back. And who knows what the right way is. But just like learning is, I think, pretty cool.
Yeah.
And by doing what you guys are doing, it's kind of shifting the paradigm, opening the window a little bit to different styles. And, I think that's a cool thing. So thank you. Keep it up.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's what we're all about, right? We're learning alongside our kids. We're always learning and changing our minds. And
I think it's really tempting to have emotional attachment to ideas you've held in the past or ways that you've treated people in the past, because it's hard to look inwardly and say, I wish I would have done something differently, or something else may have been better. But for me, I would much rather, I actually want to experience that less. And the way I can experience that feeling less is by trying to make better decisions going forward,
Sure.
Not trying to ignore all the new ideas that come across my plate. Because I know for myself, I'm not going to be able to ignore ideas that I think are good ones. And so I want to, as rapidly as possible, adopt whatever new idea that actually makes sense into my life. And, I've settled on, some different themes in my life for sure over time. But yeah, if people have good challenging questions or ways to pick it apart, I don't want to be sitting here in this glass house just pretending like we found the answers, So definitely appreciate the good questions and the scenarios and hard questions and other people on a journey of exploration too. It's what it's all about for me.
Sweet. Well, cool. Well, I appreciate you guys, and we'll touch base again soon. And you know what? So we talked about it at the beginning, but real quick, where can we find you guys? OFF045.com, and is that correct?
Yeah, we're on iTunes and Stitcher and other places you can find podcasts.
Wherever you get your podcasts.
We also have a very supportive Facebook group.
Yeah, our Facebook group is really awesome. It's just One Free Family. We have a page, but we also have a group, and that place is pretty active. Lots of really positive feedback. People in there with great ideas, thinking outside the box, and really positive and supportive. Yeah, so that's a great place to find us and our community. And I also, we have One Free Family on Instagram, so you can find us there too.
Great.
Cool. Well, very cool. Well, I'll be back in touch because there's more things I want to talk about. But
that sounds great. And enjoy your warm weather. We're over here in sweaters, so have fun.
Yeah. We are 9,000 feet above sea level here, so it is chilly.
Just kidding, then.
Which is cool.
Enjoy your cool weather.
It's not too bad though. Yeah, cool weather. That would be. I don't think it's New Hampshire chilly, but it's cool. So, well, cool. Well, thank you guys very much, and we'll talk again.
That sounds great. Thanks.
Have a good one.